But
This conference will now be recorded.
um, yeah, so I'm excited to talk. I'm excited to talk to you guys, and I haven't. This is the beginning. I've done a couple of TED Talks actually, and a lot of public speaking, and I really enjoy it. This isn't nearly as polished as my normal stuff, but so I'd love to actually really hear from you guys. So if you put stuff in the chat, I'm not the best multitasker, but I would love to talk for a while and really address any of your questions, like to sort of understand where you are all coming from. I tried to do some research on Brentwood. I'd actually lived in New York City, in Manhattan for 20 years until a couple of years ago. So New York's really my home, and so I'm sure I've been out near Brentwood a bunch of times, certainly on the way to Montauk and that sort of stuff. I am in Yeah, I normally have a great green screen setup, but everything fell to the wayside. I live in Venice, California, in LA, and I came here on March 2nd because I was out on Kauai for a friend's 50th, and I didn't want to burn all that carbon without dropping by my house. So I have a house that's mostly rented out, this really cool off-grid house in Maui. And if you search life edited Maui, you can see it. It's great. But anyway, I ended up basically being here by chance for a minute. And then this was March 2nd as everything was starting to happen. And so I decided that maybe I'll stick around for a minute and see what happens. And that was 3 months ago. So I'm actually living in my garage because the whole place is rented. And behind me is my sort of office, and interestingly and appropriately, my solar setup. So I have 52 kilowatt hours of batteries, and then a huge set of inverters and charge controllers and everything. So it's all great, except it's a little noisy and it's a little hot. But and I'm sleeping on a cot, but I have no complaints. Maui couldn't be. There've only been 120 cases and 6 deaths, and obviously that's any deaths are terrible. But it's been very lucky, and I've been able to surf and kite and hike and still get a lot of work done. So yeah, that's where I answer that question. So I guess I have like sort of two questions for you guys, just try to get a sense, and I don't want to assume, but how many, and you can just respond in the chat, how many of you are worried about climate change and its effect on yourselves and your children? And are there some of you that aren't? Thumbs up. Okay, you can just give me this. Seems like we have most people. Second question is, how many people here recycle?
Do.
We've got pretty much everyone. Does anyone not recycle? I guess it's more that maybe easier. Doesn't look like it.
Graham,
so
sorry, can you repeat the
sure.
first thing you asked? I missed that.
The first thing I asked, and please let me know if I'm not talking loud enough or whatever you guys need. I just asked how many people were worried about climate change. Is that a thing for you? And most people seem to say yes. So why do we recycle? Is a big question. It's in my experience, having sort of done this stuff for about 20 years, it's often when you talk to people about being green, it's the thing that they associate with most, and we believe it's an important thing to do for the environment. It makes us feel good. It feels like we're doing something towards the problem. And so what I want to say though is recycling actually does not a lot. And while it's definitely a thing that we want to do, just to give you an example, I could be a perfect recycling angel for a decade, 10 years, or I could skip one flight from LA to Maui, and those would be equivalent. So what a lot of people don't understand is just and this is, and I count myself as responsible for this as well. I had a company, I built a site called Tree Hugger, which is still going strong. But a lot of people don't understand sort of the scale of things. And so some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you guys about today is just about the scale of things. And so one thing that's really misunderstood is recycling. And while we definitely want to do it for the most part, there are probably some places we might not want to. But in general, we want to do it. And it's a good thing. But if the energy that you use up, mental energy, physical energy, going towards recycling is stopping you from some of the other larger impact items, then it really would probably be better if you did those than recycle. And so the example I gave, it would be better for me to figure out how to skip a flight once in those 10 years than to be a perfect recycler for 10 years. And so we care about this stuff, but if we're going to deal with it, we also want to really try to be strategic. You know, if you're trying to lose weight, you want to focus on the 6 donuts you have after dinner, not on sugar-free packet in your tea in the morning. Like you want to understand the scale of things, so you focus on the right things, particularly if some of them are harder than others. What I might do is, just to complicate matters, I've got people doing a lovely job cleaning my garage this morning. So I may, actually might be fine. Okay, so recycling. The good news about climate change is that compared to things like perhaps nuclear war or terrorism, maybe gun control, things that you might care about, with climate change, you can do things starting today that literally make a difference towards the problem. And so while it is big and vague and far out feeling, it is something to remember. You really, in addressing the problem and dealing with the stress and the worry that you might have, there is something that you can do. There's a lot you can do immediately. I was at an environmental event in LA recently. So obviously a room full of passionate people passionate about the environmental movement and just the environment in general. The speaker asks, how many of you have renewable energy at home? And literally my hand and one other hand went up. And this is a room of environmentalists. So I want to point out that there's definitely a lot of talk. There's a lot of awareness, and there's been a lot of focus on building awareness over the years. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of action. And there are reasons for that. So this is not a guilt trip in any respect, and I have certainly been there myself. But we have won some battles in this department, but we're losing the war 100%. And part of that is just getting people to actually make the moves. So we're human, and we love to point fingers. We love to place blame. So we'll talk about climate deniers. We'll talk about the government, the corporations, big oil, all the people that should be doing something. But we might not also not get our own butts in gear and not make the changes that really align our actions with our values. And there are real local consequences to this. So you can't point at you can only point at the larger trends in terms of weather. But that one's an easy thing to point on. There are a lot more floods, a lot more major storms, a lot more hurricanes. The sea level is rising. We experienced Sandy right in our backyards. I was certainly there for that. So that costs billions of dollars. And then we have heat waves, killing elderly all over the place. We've got decreasing fish in the oceans, like real stuff's happening literally in Long Island. And while action is a choice, inaction is also a choice. Like you can't not choose in this department. If you're not doing anything, you're actually making a choice, and that choice has consequences. So So a question I asked myself a while ago was just that I might be going on about this stuff, and if I really believe the risks of climate change are real and that our behavior matters, but I'm not doing much about it, then am I really different from a climate denier? And I think that I think the reality is that many of us are in this position, and so we sort of want to get honest, and really take some action. Now, it's challenging. It's challenging. That's the thing. That's why this is really understandable. I've been doing this stuff for 20 years, and when in Venice, because I moved across the country, I went to do it in Venice. Like you dig into it, and it's really hard to know what to do, and it's really hard to know how to do it. And I can tell you a little bit about just looking up, trying to sign up for renewable energy for you guys, because it wasn't that easy. I spent an hour or two just trying to figure that one out. And so this is compounded. Like most people, the average person's got a busy life, often a family, don't have a lot of time for this, and often don't have a lot of knowledge. And so when it comes time to research and figure, okay, so what should I focus? What actions should I take? When you start to dig in, there's a lot out there, and it's really complicated. And to make matters worse, the same organizations that Big Tobacco hired and that helped them really successfully push off a lot of the effects, a lot of the stuff against tobacco for decades, those people are employed by big oil. And so there's literally specific disinformation out there, also adding to the complexity of figuring this out. So it's not surprising to me at all that most people, we get recycling, but as for the other stuff, you mean well, you sit down, you try to research it, and you throw up your hands because it's really confusing and really complicated. So I'm basically working on a project now to build very localized, actionable guides for every city, and so that you can really understand what to do and how to do it, because all this stuff changes city to city. Some places have composting programs, some places have rebates for electric cars, some people do renewable energy this way, some do it another. It's complicated. It's really localized, and you can't expect your everyday person to be able to figure it out. It's unfortunately very complex and depends where you are. So I'd say, like, we want political action and voting, both local, state, and federal is definitely important, and we need systemic change. But we also, I believe that making the changes at a personal level is very impactful. Doing that just puts you in a different space. You're doing something, you feel good about it, you influence others around you, and when it comes, like say me in LA, I got an electric car. So once I've gone through that process and made the change myself, when I go to tell the city that they should be getting electric buses, I'm coming from a very different place. One of sort of more integrity. And so I believe that we need systemic change. We need corporations and governments definitely to make this a lot easier. But the way forward is really for a small amount of our society just to get serious about this and make these changes and start sending a message to the government and to the corporations that will bring about a larger systemic change. Okay, so what's sort of cool about this is that they're actually, impact-wise, almost wherever you are, there are about 5 big impactful actions. I call them the big 5. And so I want to share those with you in hopes that you'll learn something and may start to be familiar with them if you're not already, and ideally take on one or more of them and make a change. the cool thing about the climate crisis is that we really have many of these solutions already. You can actually cut your footprint in half without too much effort. And if you look at it overall, you can save money while you're doing it, and it'll be healthier, and you're gonna feel great about it, and you're gonna influence others. The environmental movement has been really guilty of 200 little small tips, and small steps add up, and just you need to know the scale of these things, and some are more important than others. So I want to share those with you. I'll go over them in sort of specifics, like in more detail, but basically in about probably less than 2 days effort overall, you could have your footprint with these 5 moves. So they are, drum roll please. And actually, you know what, it would be fun. Let's see, I'd like some guesses. What do you guys think? Big 5, the most impactful moves that you could make in your own lives to lower your footprint. Solar, yeah. Buy local, I'll talk about that one. Solar heating, probably solar hot water heating, depending on where you are. Driving less, yep. Hybrid cars, not flying, that's a big one. Transportation is a big one. All right, so there are a bunch. So you guys are pretty on target. The walking, fashion, fast fashion, totally correct on that. We used to have much higher quality things that lasted for years, and fast fashion is definitely one. Interestingly, the buy local, if you're talking about food, it turns out that that food miles doesn't actually make that much of a difference in terms of carbon emissions. So that's actually a new learning for me. It does really depend, as with all this stuff. If it's flown in an airplane, that definitely affects things. But yeah, food miles are not too bad. Fast fashion is basically the Zara, I guess, of the or H&M. These are just basically people that come out very rapidly with the latest fashions, and it's so inexpensive that people buy it and then throw it out quickly because it's cheap. That's what's called. That's what fast fashion. Yeah, or crappy cheap clothing made from polyester and synthetic fabric is. Although, yeah. Okay, well, here they are. To get the particular order, I'd need to really understand your own lifestyles. But the big 5 are generally these. 1, switch to renewable energy, and I'll go into detail. 2, switch to an electric car if you're driving. 3, optimize your flying. I'll go into that. Flying is actually huge. 4, moving to a plant-rich diet. And also, at the same level as plant-rich diet, which is fascinating, is reducing your food waste. So food waste is actually a huge one, and I'll dig into that. And the number 5 is buying carbon offsets, and I'll go into depth, but that can actually make a pretty big difference, and is not too expensive at this point. So the main idea here is if we could actually get the early adopters, the innovators, people, a small percent of the population actually making these changes, that can start to be a tipping point and really can change things. Part of it is we need to build the social norms, and you can see the social norms at work with recycling, right? That really stuck. Same with just littering. So, back in the 70s, you used to see people throwing bags of garbage outside of the car window. Like, it's a whole different scene now. And so those are social norms that we need to build. So let's talk about renewable energy, and please keep a list of your questions for the end. I want to answer as many as I can. So renewable energy. So often your heating and your cooling and the rest of the electricity in your home is created in electricity anyway, is created in a carbon intensive manner. So they'll even burn oil in order to create electricity, and that has a lot of emissions. So nowadays, and it's really coming along, it's starting to be cheap. It's certainly cheaper than coal in most places, which is amazing. So switching to solar or wind, perhaps nuclear, perhaps hydro, ideally at a smaller scale, but primarily solar and wind. Onshore wind being, I think, the cheapest of all at this point. So through PSEG, however you guys say that, I called around, and yeah, it's not as easy as it should be. But switching, there's something called, if you basically log into your account, there's something called Green Choice, and they offer up two different options. One is Community Energy Inc. and one is Sterling Planet. And from my understanding, you just contact them, sign up with them, and then they contact PSEG, and then basically do the deal with them, and then so you still get one bill. It does in this one, this way of going to renewable energy, which is the laziest, the easiest, which is nice. 2 to 3 cents per kilowatt hour extra. So that's about at 19 cents a kilowatt hour is what you guys typically pay. From my understanding, that's about a 10 to 15% premium that you'd be paying to get 100% renewable energy. The cool thing about it is it's ideally takes you about 10 minutes, and it's a set it and forget it. This is not, I have to recycle every week. This is, I do this thing, I pay a little more money, and it's done forever. And there's something very nice about that. For the more advanced and for the people who want to save some money as opposed to spend a little more, it looks like solar actually makes quite a bit of sense in Long Island. I have been in contact with a company called Pick My Solar, and I'm going to try to get a whole bunch of these notes to Peter, who he can probably send out to you guys. But there's a company called pickmysolar.com. And they literally throw in the address, and they're a middle person, and they get you bids from all sorts of people. And so the nice thing there is those contractors want to do a good job because they value their relationship with Pick My Solar, as opposed to when they're just doing a deal with you, you may never buy solar from them again, so they might not care as much. In any case, I think the payback from very quick research is probably around 7 years for rooftop solar, and then you've got literally free electricity for decades after that. So it's a terrific investment. Add a battery to it, and you'll also have some resilience in terms of power outages and that sort of stuff. The third part to renewable energy that you guys can do, and I'm very envious because I cannot do this in Venice, is community solar. And community solar basically means a company, usually, sometimes it can be self-led, like a co-op, builds like a solar or a wind farm or something nearby, and then you basically buy in, you get a share of it. And so the beauty of this is you can do this in your home, whether you own it or you rent it, and you can actually take it with you from place to place. And the guy from PSEG said it's basically 16 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's 3 cents a kilowatt hour cheaper to get community solar. So even if you didn't care about the environment whatsoever, this could be a way for you to save some money. So that I think is very cool, and I think the part of the idea is if you do something at scale, it becomes cheaper. And so putting a few panels on your rooftop versus tons of panels all at once, maybe on a ground structure, it just makes it a lot cheaper. So yeah, so community solar worth looking into, and I think if you just search community solar Long Island, there seem like a bunch of options there. And I wish I could be more informed, but we haven't come to your part of the country yet. So that's renewable energy. The first one, switch to renewable energy. It makes a big difference. And if we were starting to set a trend, it would just make everything flip, and that would be terrific. The second one is drive electric. So gas cars are a big part of most people's footprints if they drive a bunch due to the emissions of gas. Electric cars are just more efficient. And they're more efficient and greener, even if you're charging them from coal-powered, 100% coal-powered electricity. So just because they're efficient. So if you are charging them from green electricity, then even better. So you literally could be, conceptually, you're filling up your tank with wind or with solar, with sunshine, as opposed to with oil. There depends on where you look, but most studies seem to suggest the total cost of ownership already with electric cars is less than gas, mostly due to the cheaper gas and because they have less parts, so they just have less repairs. And I think that's even better if you buy a secondhand electric car, because I think their values drop a little when you buy them. So they've got good cost of ownership. They've got amazing performance, lots of torque, and less noise and less smell. So I've been driving electric for a while. Here in Maui, I have a 73 Volkswagen Thing that I converted to electrical, which I wouldn't suggest. It did not end up being inexpensive, but it's very fun. And then I have a Kia Soul EV, which I love, which I think I bought for $18,000 on Maui. But in Venice, where I really live, I have a Fiat 500e, the classic Cinquecento, the tiny little thing, and I got it for $7,000. I think 30,000 miles. I could have gotten it for like 15,000 miles. There's so many of them. And I looked, and you can actually buy them. I looked to see if I could buy them in your area. You can. There are definitely some in the $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. I love that car. It's so fun. It's so easy to park. It's so fast, and it's terrific. It has lower range, and it only has a level 2 charger, so it's some disadvantages, but $7,000, I'm driving electric, bit of a no-brainer. So getting your hands on an electric car as soon as you can, selling the gas guzzler is one of the big five. Let's talk about flying. So the weird thing about flying is some people, a lot of Americans don't fly at all, and then some Americans fly an absolute ton, and then there's sort of some in the middle. But if you do fly more than a couple flights a year, I want to just give you a sense of it, because unfortunately, and as the son of a airline pilot, who's been to 90 countries, this is a very tough one for me. I love flying more than anything. But I'm trying to be a lot better about it, and so I'll tell you about my general plan. But to give you a sense, I ran some calculators for how many tons of carbon. So the average American emits 20 tons of carbon. So that gives you a sense. So 20 tons of carbon per year is the average American, 20. A flight to Bangkok from New York is 5.6 tons. So 6 over 20, like that 30% of your footprint from one return flight. To LA, it's 1.6 tons. So that's, still a nice chunk. 2.2 tons to London, 0.7 to Miami. So almost any flight that you might take from New York is going to be 5% to 25% of your average footprint. So that gives you a sense, like just a few flights, and it really makes a difference. So what can you do there? Well, interestingly, you can fly during the day. That helps lower emissions, strangely, I think, due to the contrails that they create. That's sort of a new thing. You can fly economy. When you fly in the first class or the upper seats, they take up more space, and so you own more of that footprint. So that's one way. I think as a general policy, try to avoid and encourage people to not do what I call surgical trips. So surgery is sort of when you sort of go in and do something and go out. And so that's the idea of surgical trip. So that's when your friend wants to go to Vegas for 3 days. It's a long way to go. It's an expensive way to go, and you don't really get to take in where you're traveling. So I think they're a real travesty, and so really try to avoid those. Business meetings, of course, like as COVID has illustrated for many companies who weren't into it before, just how you can video conference and really get stuff done. And so if you can skip a business trip by video conference, you're going to save some money for your company. You perhaps don't get sick on the plane. You also maybe avoid jet lag. So yeah, business meetings is good. Probably the biggest one, the one I'm really looking at, is just less trips but longer. So stack your trips. Plan to do this. So say I'm in LA. I have friends in Toronto, in Montreal, in New York, in Europe. Instead of doing a bunch of single trips, I pack them all together. Go for less trips, longer. And so I think that's it takes a bit of planning, but that's an easy way to allow you to get the same experience. You're still getting to do the travel, to make the trip, but you're just doing it in a smarter way. And that's of course going to save you like hundreds of dollars right off the bat, because you cut out a flight and maybe you don't get sick, maybe you don't get jet lag. It's nice in that respect. So optimize your flying. That's the second one. The third one is food, and I'm sure you guys are all aware that food is part of our footprint, and there are a lot of people that have been pushing vegetarianism and veganism for a long time, mostly unsuccessfully. So I think the main thing to understand with food is, or your diet is, should I go in another room? Is it, yeah? No, should I go in another room? Oh, sorry. Beef and lamb are the ones with the big footprints. By far. Like, it's a huge difference. So that is one thing to understand. So beef and lamb are really big, much bigger than chicken and pork and fish. Another thing to understand is, as you probably already do, how many people have tried some of these new sausages or burgers by Impossible or Beyond Meats? I see at least one, two, handful. Let me tell you, for those that haven't, these are not the veggie burgers of the past. It's a whole new thing, and it's sort of mind blowing. And I'm like one of my TED Talks is called Weekday Vegetarianism. So I do still love meat. It's a hard for me not. And I was at a wedding, and I just kept on asking the guy, like, come on, like, is it really, like, I really had to check, like, they've done such a good job. So all that to say, and like the sausages, like I think there's a Beyond Meat sausage that we've been eating, like a spicy Italian or something, that it really hard to tell a difference. And so there are some good alternatives also. So you make a lot of headway just by seriously reducing or cutting out beef and lamb. Those are the big ones. So even if you just like stop eating them or reduce them a fair amount and just ate chicken and fish and pork, that would be definitely doing something. A step up from that, you could go more of the weekday vegetarian idea, where basically you're vegetarian during the week, and then the weekend you do what you want. And maybe you only eat chicken, fish, or lamb, or chicken, fish, or pork on the weekend. Or you go full vegetarian or even full vegan, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Most of the way that our animals are brought up is, if you're really conscious of it, it's brutal. But animals can be brought up in good ways, and so it's really for you. But just want you to understand that is definitely an impact. And should I go in another room? Is that good? Yeah. Okay, great. bring you into the other room here. So moving to as close to vegetarian or vegan as possible is great, but you don't necessarily have to go all the way. And the main idea is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think that's the big one. You know, figure out what works for you, and just start there. The second part, so I cheated a little bit. It's probably really the big six, but in terms of food, is food waste. And so this is a recent discovery by a group called Project Drawdown. And basically, like if you're good at reducing food waste, it's the equivalent of moving to a vegetarian diet. Like it's really big. And so basically, the way that it works is that there's a lot of food waste particularly in the U.S. And so we buy too much, and then we end up throwing it out. And when we throw it out, if you don't compost it, then it goes into the landfill, and in the landfill, it creates methane. And methane, as many of you probably know, is one of the worst greenhouse gases. So I think it's 250 times carbon dioxide. And so we really want to avoid it. And the way to avoid that is to not waste it in the first place. And secondly, if stuff does go bad, then you can compost it. And so starting a home compost, or dropping it off as appropriate. A trick that I use is to get a plastic container that I put in the freezer. And so I just put all the compost stuff in there, and then you have no bugs and no smell, and then you just dump it. And composts are actually not that complicated, and they're sort of fun, and it's important. You can actually build good soil locally, and if you don't already have a garden, then you could potentially start a garden, or you can give it to other people. So that's the second one. But food waste in general is just being conscious, doing some really good food planning, and better food planning means you're automatically saving money, and just trying to get into the process. Like the first thing I do when I go to make dinner is go, okay, what's going bad? What do I want to eat soon? And really, and trying to make all the stuff in your fridge visible also, so you're not hiding stuff in the back and then finding it later when it goes bad. Yeah, you all are familiar with that one. So that's the other one, is food back. And so finally, the big five. The last one is basically offsetting the rest. And so buying carbon offsets is meaningful. And you may have heard there definitely were some early days of offsets, and there were a lot of shenanigans and people cheating and really very uncool. But now they have gold standard. And so a third-party accreditation, and so they really look at it carefully. And because it's all low-hanging fruit, the offsets are really cheap. So what offsets are, for those of you, if any of you don't know, offset is basically you are supporting a project that is preventing emissions from happening, like protecting a forest, for example, or you are sequestering carbon, so actually putting carbon into the soil. So that might be through planting trees. It might be through methane capture from garbage dumps. There are all sorts of ways that you can basically help reduce your footprint. And so that you buy them by the ton. And so the idea is you would look at your overall footprint and then buy the equivalent number, and you could literally be carbon positive, which is where we all want to get to. So there are lots of ways to do that. You could go do it going forward, on a monthly basis, or just buy it for the whole year. You could even do your whole life, which I think is a really cool idea. It's not for people that you need a little money to do it. It's probably $5,000 to $15,000, but that would be for offsetting since you were born till you die, the whole thing, which I think is really, really cool. They're cheap now, but they will get more expensive. I think really cool is if you can get ones that are close to home. Try to find projects that are more local. And yeah, goldstandard.org is where you can get them, but I'll see if I can get Peter to, I'll put together something for you guys that he can email you. So like overall, those are the big five, and I don't know what those, what do you guys think? Did that sound like way too much work or overwhelming, or what? Maybe you can put something in the chat. Was there any thoughts on the big five, and were they was that what you expected? Does it feel like a ton of work, impossible, easy? Like what do you feel about it? Or maybe no feelings.
Where I live, we have 65% solar farm. Our whole piece of property, 211 acres.
Wow.
Has gone solar.
Wow, that's so great.
Yeah, we were lucky that we were able to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Good investment.
Right.
Any other thoughts from anyone? You can put it in the chat, or
I put a question in chat.
The true that solar cannot have any trees. Shade's a problem. My understanding is it's less of a problem. It used to be like you get some shade and it sort of messes with the whole thing. I think you can get some shade now, but obviously shade's not ideal for sure. And I would say, and that's an argument for community solar, where you also pay less. So that might be what to look for in that case. Surprising.
We have a lot in Brentwood where they've put solar on top of all of the parking lots for the train stations and at the Suffolk Community College or the courthouses, but we've heard nothing in regard to reports from Suffolk County in any way if it's benefiting us. No one's reporting and telling us the benefits. So I think that doesn't help the public know that solar is a good thing.
So you would want to know, is it working?
Yeah, what's the results? What are they doing with that solar? Who's getting the benefit of it? You know, how much, even if it's just going to, let's say, the courthouse, are they saving? Are they have a zero footprint for that building? You know, like I think the public should hear that so that then people would be encouraged more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, my guess is that it's sort of one of those things, like it's a great investment. So if you have the money to do it, it's sort of a great thing to do. So it's really great to see governmental buildings and doing it, because it's like it's a no-brainer. They're going to save money, which saves us taxpayers money. Not to mention the green aspects of it. So,
but so far we haven't seen any of that because they haven't reduced any of our bills. They haven't said that we're not having a bill increase this year. We all got rate increases, so that tells us that no, somebody's getting the benefit of that solar, but not us individually.
My guess would be it's probably feeding a government building. So in some, like, you know, finding it would be hard, but basically in a budget, they're going to be spending less money on power over time, and so in theory your taxes would slightly reduce. But it's not, it's not going to be a huge amount. Yeah, we can help. Someone said surprising. I was surprised by the planes. Is the 20 tons per person or the whole plane? The 20 tons is the entire footprint of a person. So that's your car, flying, house, food, everything. That's I was telling you the 20 tons because I wanted you to get a sense of how big those flights are. So the flight was so a flight to Bangkok return from New York is 5.6. Let's say 6 tons. So one flight, 6 tons, and the average American is 20 tons total for the year. So my point there was just to illustrate planes. They unfortunately, they're very efficient, but they just go a long way. and so they end up, yeah, they just burn a lot of carbon. Is the 6 tons for the plane or each person on the plane? The 6 tons is for the person on the plane. That's for a person, one person's flight.
If there are 300 people on the plane, it would be 1,800 tons of carbon.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And if the plane's empty, then what? I mean, what is the plane itself doing?
The same thing. I mean, it would probably be a little less because it's a little lighter. But yeah, that's the thing. Like that's why we also you sort of in a way in an ideal world we'd have every plane from an efficiency level we'd have every plane every seat filled because you're going to burn the energy. It's just like it's a lot of just uses a lot of energy, a lot of gas to sort of get that heavy thing up and flying, and you know.
Yeah,
but
it how the calculation was done.
Yeah. Yeah, if you search like a flight calculator or something online, you can find there are lots of that show you how to do it. But yeah, it's a lot. The problem is the convenience. Like they're actually very efficient. But
well,
the thing
how
is,
do you
like,
get to Hawaii without a plane, unless you go to
yeah, exactly. And like, so say living in LA, like, am I gonna drive to New York? Yeah, maybe once a decade. But am I gonna fly to New York? Yeah. And the thing is, even though it's more efficient to go in a plane than for me to drive, unless I'd have to have like 4 people in the car in an efficient car to be more efficient in the car than the plane. But the plane is easy. So that's I mean, convenience is like, if you want to like the top level, what's killing us is convenience. Like that's the fast fashion, flights, food, packaging. It's like, yeah.
And I think regarding food waste, so many people throw things away when they see what they consider the expiration date on a can, on a container, when it's really not bad.
Correct. That's a great point.
And how much food gets thrown away, even when the post office in their May collection, which they didn't do this year, obviously, but when they do the post office food drive, they won't accept any cans that are outdated, which seems to be a horrible waste and very unfortunate.
Yes, I agree with that entirely. Yeah, I mean the challenge of it's a wonderful thing to have lots of lawyers in the United States of America, and it's an unfortunate thing as well. There are all these just legal stuff, and I bet you that's one of them. But yeah, for us to understand though that you're 100% right. Often stuff is past due, and that if you think about it, that's advantageous for the people selling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Selling the company, the company selling the stuff, having it.
Milk, I use almond milk because I like almond milk. I am using almond milk that had a sell-by date that was in April, and it's fine. There is nothing wrong. Almond milk never goes bad. It literally never goes bad.
Yeah, and I think we've evolved over millions of years. We're pretty good at knowing, like, yeah, that's good or that's bad, and so we should probably trust ourselves a little more.
It's like eggs too. Eggs last longer than the date on it.
Oh, eggs, absolutely. Eggs also keep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so those are the big ones, and that's the crazy thing about climate change. Like, we have so many solutions. Like that, if you did those things, it puts you in a whole different level. Like you're literally half a normal person's footprint. And if we could get a small amount of the population doing this, it's going to drive demand for all these things, and it's going to pave the way for new social norms and for companies and governmental institutions to do the systemic change that makes the rest of it really much easier for everyone. So that's the beautiful thing. And I have to say, like, it's having sort of lived it myself. I mean, my place here in Maui, it's entirely off grid. I get all the water from the sky, water catchment, and then I got a bunch of gardens. I drive a bunch of electric cars, and there's a feeling that I can't even describe, but it's really nice, and it's smart and it's healthy and it's the future. And I get in a normal gas car now and I feel like a caveman. Like I feel like it's dirty. Like I'm like, oh, I have to do this, and the sound and the smell, and like when you've driven a wonderful, quiet, speedy electric car, it just you don't want to go back. And the same thing, like if you conceptually understand where your energy is coming from, like oil is it's an incredible thing, and it's got us to where we are, and that's amazing. But we have better ways of doing it, and it's disgusting in just so many ways. So yeah, there's a beautiful green future, and it's not that complicated. Okay, I've definitely chatted enough. So I'll try to see if Peter can send out some stuff. I'll also get my email is just my name at Gmail. If you guys, I'm going to be working on these guides, so if you're interested in being on sort of my list and I can send you them when you're done, please reach out. And now I'll turn it over to you. I definitely don't know everything, but I know a bunch. So if you guys have any questions or frankly comments, I'm okay with that too. Let me know. I'm available. So please comment or question.
Let's see. One thing I was wondering about the community solar that you were talking about, and was that one of the PSEG options?
So I talked to this guy John, and I will give you his number because I definitely had to do got a bit of a run around trying to figure this out. But yeah, I think he suggested it's the same sort of deal in that you come to an arrangement with the community group, and then they contact PSEG, and then you get they still do the billing, but you contact them, and so I just did a search on community solar Long Island, and there seemed to be a bunch, so I would just start there, and Pick My Solar might also have some options, and yeah, I mean look around. If you're not fortunate to find something, I can take another look. But yeah, it sounds like you guys have community solar, and you save money. It's like that is such a no-brainer.
That sounds great.
And just it's like so cool, and also like how neat that you would literally know where your energy was coming from. You could go and see it instead of it, coming from who knows where, and they were fighting wars over, it's like, and causing like, I mean, have you seen the pictures of like the tar pits up in, I'm Canadian, up in Canada? It's like it's a hell on earth. Isn't buying food locally a good thing? Yes, it's still a good thing. I think anything local is a good thing. I know part of what COVID is showing us is we've got these crazy supply chains that are they're not resilient, and anything that is local, you're more connected to, and it's more trustable. If you're a local farm growing stuff, you don't want to poison anyone because you're going to hear about it. But if you're in a far off country, it's a different story. So buying food locally is definitely the best, and it definitely will have the least food miles. My point earlier was just that we always thought that buying local was very important in terms of emissions, and it turns out it's just generally not.
So of course I have to ask, you are the namesake of a famous race car driver. Any relation?
No relation, but it's quite funny. I've done internet stuff for a long time, so luckily my name just comes up when you search. It's not just him, but it was definitely a fight to get on there. For anyone who doesn't know, Graham Hill is a famous race car driver, mostly the 70s, and then had a son named Damien Hill that actually did very well also. And yeah, real ladies' man with like a mustache, yeah, yep.
So I have cousins in Venice as well on Dudley Avenue or Dudley Street, right by the beach.
Oh,
You know,
nice. I think I know exactly. I think Dudley's only a few blocks from me. Nice.
by Rose Court or Rose Avenue and Dudley by the
Yes,
Cadillac Hotel. The Cadillac Hotel, is that still there? On the
it
corner?
is.
It is,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Yeah.
It is. Well, I haven't checked since this weekend. There's a bunch of rioting, unfortunately.
They've been there
But
for,
oh yeah, wow, they've seen some changes. Yeah, that's cool.
yeah.
Did anyone have any specific questions on? Oh, maybe I'll the big five: renewable energy, flying, food, electric driving, and offsets.
I was glad to hear that beef and lamb are the big boo-boos in the meat industry, because those are the two that I don't really eat particularly.
That's good.
So I don't eat meat very often, but when I do, it's usually
Yeah.
pork or chicken, you know.
Yeah, that's good. I wish I had the same. I love lamb and
I like
beef.
it, but I just don't eat it because you have to cook it. I don't cook.
Well, there.
I've cooked more since this virus scare than I've ever cooked in my life.
Yeah, me too.
too, but most of it is like vegetarian quiches and things like that. So very little meat.
Why is
Yeah.
pork not in that listing?
So I
Not in it.
I think it has to do with the grazing, doesn't it?
yeah, I think a lot of the beef is the land use.
Yeah.
So they cut down sometimes tropical forests, and so there's a big land use change from they take up a lot of land and they change it. I think that's one. And the methane coming from cattle, and the joke was always that it was coming out the back end, and that is true. That is some, but it's often the belching. And so a lot of methane comes because they have like 7 stomachs or whatever and eat a lot of grass and grain. Just a lot of methane comes out, and methane, as I was saying before, is a big greenhouse gas, very powerful. So that's I think it's mostly the methane and land use change. And so I guess pork doesn't have the methane same issue, and probably takes up a lot less space and doesn't require cutting down forests as much. Yeah, so it's not too bad.
I thought that with carbon offsets, I was kind of surprised by that, because do you ever feel like doing that is like you can buy an offset and then do a little bit of eat meat if you want? You're able to do those sorts of things?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and I find it fascinating. And I got to say, I think I had the reaction for a long time, which most people have, and there's sort of like a discomfort with it. And I think it comes down to a little bit of resentment towards people with money. Like we don't want the rich to just be able to pay their way and not sort of have to sacrifice or something like that. I really think part is that. And I think I had that same thing. But with gold standard, and if it's taking a ton of carbon out of the air, I think that we could do a lot worse than have a ton of people buying offsets and have supporting many, many, many more projects. So I don't know. I'd like to see more debate. I'm coming down more on that it's okay. And yeah, that is an argument. You could say I do want to eat more meat and I'm going to buy offsets. And the crazy thing is now they're quite inexpensive. So yeah, That's probably my opinion on that is a little bit controversial, but I'd like to really understand. People have compared it to the Catholic. I'm forgetting what they were called. It used to be back in the day you could pay money to the church. What are they called?
Indulgences.
Indulgences.
Oh yeah,
That's the one. Indulgences.
like that.
But I think a guy I know from back in the day who writes for Vox, and his name's David Roberts, writes great environmental stuff, and he's like, yeah, it's not a very good comparison because like if sin there was a certain amount of sin defined in the world, then it might be, but it just doesn't work that way. But with this, there really is a certain amount of carbon, and so I don't think it's actually a good description. But I think that's, yeah, people are uncomfortable with it. But yeah, I'm okay with it. I would like to, my preference would be that people make a bunch of these changes and then buy offsets. I'm not sure if I'm being intellectually honest. It still feels a little funny to me if someone who does nothing and just buys offsets. That feels a little funny. But better doing that than nothing by a long shot. And they're supporting real projects. And there's some really cool projects. Like they buy like solar lights for people in developing countries that are using like kerosene. And so it's a win-win-win-win-win, because basically the kerosene is costing them more money than it should. So solar is way cheaper. It's allowing people to do stuff at night, educate themselves. There's no kerosene or cook stove. Sometimes it's cook stove, so it's like it's got a health benefit, has an education benefit, it has a finance benefit, and so there's some really terrific projects out there. So you sort of can you cover a lot of things at once, and you can even write them off.
Wow.
So yeah, I think offsets are good. Plant-based meat may contain a lot of soy and mostly GMO. Isn't soy production high in carbon footprint? That's a great question, and I would say my not super informed response would be that it will still have a lot less footprint than meat. And obviously GMO is not ideal, and there are definitely some problems. Whether the replacement meats are that healthy is also probably a question. So they're the impossible and beyond meat, probably not ideal. But if it stops you from eating a burger and you enjoy it, and I'm all for it. Any other thoughts or comments? One ironic thing about meat is people for grass-fed meat seem to cause more. Oh, I might have not characterized that very well. I think that well, I don't know if guys have heard about this. This is fascinating. So, and I would say here, one thing to take home for sure. There are two words that are very, very important in all this, and they are, it depends. Because it really depends. It depends who you are, where you are, how you live, like all this stuff. Like beef, generally really bad. In certain cases, as I'll go into, could be totally fine, could even be good. And so they're doing this thing called, I always forget the name, I think it's called managed grazing or aggressive grazing. And so what they realize is if they take a herd of cattle, I think they can do it with goats and sheep too, and they put them outside in an area, grass area, field, and they let them go to town for a day to maybe 3 days, and they munch down the grass, but not too far. And then of course they're spreading manure all over the place. And this stresses the plant, the grass, and so it makes for deeper roots. and then gives it all the manure. And then what they do is they move them. And if they do that every 1 to 3 days or something like that, a lot of carbon is put into the soil. So ironically, one of the big solutions to climate change may be eating beef coming from this particular way of doing it. It is absolutely not standard now, though. The feedlot stuff is standard, and it's horrible. So it really depends. And so the emissions coming from the cows, it's not worse with grass. It's actually probably better, I would imagine. I'm just guessing on this, with grass, because typically in the feedlots we feed them grain, which they're not really designed to eat. And so my understanding is that I think that makes it even worse. But main point being, either way, the general way that we grow our beef is very high emissions, but there may be other ways to do it which could be really good. There you go. They fatten them up in the feedlots with corn and soybeans. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the big argument, which many of you have heard, is just that vegetarians are just way more efficient. Like if you were trying to make get a calorie of food, it makes sense to just grow the calorie and eat the calorie, not grow a bunch of corn and soy and etc. and then feed it into the cow in a very inefficient manner, and then get your calories from I think it's something like, I think it's often like 6 times it's 6 times the less efficient, because we're going in this convoluted way to get the calorie into us instead of just eating the vegetable in the first place. But my point earlier, like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. You can eat a lot less meat or different meat and make a big difference. And I think that's a great place to start. You don't have to, just don't not do anything because you're not ready to be a vegan. Any other thoughts, questions, comments, requests? Well, thanks for, I'm glad the phone and everything ended up working out. That was really lucky, and it was really nice talking to you guys. I appreciated the comments and the questions, and yeah, if I was to ask for one thing, I'd ask you to try to figure out your renewable energy. Either get community solar, or get some panels on your roof, or just switch over to renewable. Also, even if you're planning on going solar, switch over now to the renewable energy, and then you're doing it, this week, instead of waiting a bunch of months to get your solar thing up and rolling.